Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. If you're like me, you've been hearing a lot of discussion about the Common Core educational standards. They're being adopted in over 40 U.S. states. The Common Core is an attempt to establish uniform standards in math and English in order to determine what a child should know after completing a given grade. Now, polling shows growing opposition to the Common Core. Governor Bobby Jindal of Louisiana filed a federal lawsuit against the federal government over the implementation of the standards in his state. My next guests have spent years studying and following the progress of the Common Core, and they're here tonight to debate the controversial standards. Please welcome EMMETT MCGROARTY. He's the Director of Education for the American Principles Project, and Michael BRICKMAN, National Policy Director for the Thomas Fordham Institute. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. Let's start with what is the Common Core? There's a lot of confusion. Some people think this is a curriculum. Others realize it's a standard. What is it? What are we dealing with?
The Common Core standards are K-12 standards in English and math. They are aligned with tests. There's standardized tests that the children take that are based on the Common Core, and then teachers are evaluated and schools are evaluated based on how the children do on those tests. And the intent there is that that will drive the curriculum. It's not saying you have to read this book, the children have to study this book, but it's saying this is the type of book they have to study, the type of curriculum. They have to have a curriculum aligned with the standards.
Michael BRICKMAN, why is this needed now?
Well, you know, for too long, states have set standards. They've had standards for a long time, and there's always been this balance between the state setting standards, the goals for what we expect students to know, and at the local level, they set the curriculum, and that doesn't change. But the problem is, for too long, those standards, those expectations, those goals were set far too low. And when students graduated from high school, they were told year after year after year they were doing well, they were proficient, but all of a sudden they graduate, they're not ready to get a job. They're not ready to go to college. They're not ready for a career in the armed forces. That's a problem.
But look, here's the thing. United States used to have one of the best education systems in the whole world.
What happened?
It started falling apart about the same time the federal government started interfering and started getting involved in education. And here's the principle here. Someone can't have two masters. You can't have accountability to the federal government in Washington, D.C., and accountability to parents and voters and citizens. That's the problem here.
Michael, you mentioned a moment ago, kids weren't college ready, and this promises to make them such. How?
Well, if you set goals for students and those goals aren't even high enough to prepare students to be ready for college, you're going to see exactly what's happened year after year after year. We're spending millions and millions of dollars reteaching college freshmen things they should have already learned when they were in high school. And that's a cost to taxpayers, that's a cost to parents, that's a reason, part of the reason that college has gotten so expensive. And so it's important that we set goals that are high enough for students to achieve. If we set the high goals, the students will meet them.
Where did these standards come from?
Well, they came from private entities, private associations, the National Governors Association and Council of Chief State School Officers.
Why not educators?
That were driven by the Gates Foundation and other private entities that had this idea they wanted a national education system.
To what end?
Well, as you said in your question to Michael, there was a promise. There was a promise that these standards were going to be of high quality. And that's what many politicians, and I might add over 100 Catholic dioceses signed on to this idea that these standards are going to be evidence-based, internationally benchmarked, and of high quality. The problem is all these people painted themselves into a corner, and when the final product came out, lo and behold, these standards are of inferior quality. Math alone, by 8th grade, our students will be under Common Core 2 years behind their peers in internationally high-performing countries. This is a national tragedy.
Well, that's a talking point that I think a lot of people would very much disagree with. And by that standard, if they were 2 years behind under the Common Core, who knows where they were before? Because you look at a state like Louisiana that you mentioned, their standards, especially in math, were not near as good as the Common Core. And I'll give you an example. 3rd grade, Louisiana's old standards allowed students, or even expected students, to type in 3 + 3 into a calculator to get 6. That's not good enough in the early grades. You need to know instantaneously what those basic math facts are, so you can do algebra. You can do higher
Michael,
level math.
why not bring in educators to be part of this? But they were brought in later in the process. This seems to have been engineered by others, and the National Governors Association took the lead. Correct, or is that a misnomer?
The National Governors Association took the lead, and that's why they say this is state-led. But in point of fact, the National Governors Association, which is located here in Washington, D.C., does not have a grant of authority from any state. It's a private association. It takes private money, and that's what dictates what it does.
Michael, you were saying.
Right. So there were educators involved throughout this entire process. There were educators who helped validate the standards, educators who were consulted and helped writing the standards. And let's remember, these standards were designed to be based on the best of what was already going on around the country.
Then why are we seeing teachers walking away from the Common Core? Earlier, in 2013, 76% approval for the Common Core standards. This is an Education Next poll. This is a group that supports and is pro-school reform, a pro-school reform journal. 76% approval in 2013, 46% this year. That is a precipitous drop, and the Gallup poll shows general Americans looking at this, 60% oppose it. Why?
Well, it's interesting. They did, in the Education Next poll that you mentioned, they did a really interesting thing. They asked people about the Common Core, but then they asked a separate and equivalent group of people about, and they didn't say the words Common Core, but they merely described the standards. And you saw that the approval was much higher. And the reason for that is because there's so much misinformation out there, people saying so many negative things about the Common Core, when I think there's a really deep misunderstanding about the Common Core to begin with. The Education Next poll also looked at that and found a lot of really deep misconceptions.
Yeah, well, that Education Next poll, that question that didn't mention the Common Core, did say, would you be in favor of state-led? And that's the thing. Common Core was not state-led.
And that's the focus of your argument, that it should be state and local led rather than a national imposition.
Yes, it should have been a public process. This should have been a public document. It shouldn't have been drafted behind closed doors in Washington, D.C. This process by which the Common Core was drafted, we don't know why the people were on the committees. We don't know why they were chosen. You know, the English drafters didn't include any high school English teachers or college English professors.
I had an email. We're short on time, so I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to move along here. I had an email earlier, and there was some concern. Some teachers, admittedly, this is from a Catholic school, and they were suggesting that the history and literature standards were created with a particular agenda in mind. Any validity to that?
Not at all. You know, these are standards. First of all, they're English language arts and math standards. Go read the standards for yourself. They're at corestandards.org. People can go read the standards. And let me just point something else out.
They were absolutely
if any of these things were true, if there's an agenda behind them, if there's any kind of ideology in the standards, if this was going to force a curriculum, if this was a nationalized education, any of these things that are being claimed, if those were true, Raymond, I'd be right here on his side. But they're not true.
Emmett?
Well, no, this is absolutely true. The Common Core was designed for workforce preparation. That's why we have a dramatic shift from studying classic literature, imaginative literature, to information text. What's information text? Well, it includes treaties, laws, how-to manuals, marketing brochures. This is a travesty.
Yet again, another debunked talking.
Okay,
that is clear. The drafters of the Common Core have been quite explicit about that most ELA programs will have to shift substantially to informational text.
But before I'll give you a quick moment to respond. Go ahead.
Well, you know, sure, we need people to read. We want our students to read both fiction and nonfiction text.
Studies show that reading fiction makes children better readers, period, including of information.
Right, and I'm about to agree with you.
Good.
We should be reading the classics. You're right, it's been pushed out of the schools for far too long, but that has nothing to do with Common Core. That's been going on for decades. Hold on, Emmett, I got to respond to your point. This has been going on for decades. There's a clear focus, if you read the actual standards, clear focus on literature. Literature goes on in the English classes. These other nonfiction readings, that goes on in social studies and science and all these other classes. You need to actually read what's in the standards.
Some of the teachers that I've been speaking with, some who've been emailing me, they suggest that you're teaching to the test, so the child is sort of caught in a few pages of Peter Pan, for instance, in one report recently. They're caught rereading a few pages of Peter Pan, never able to go on because they're teaching to and focused on the test. Is that a valid criticism?
I don't think so. I think, first of all, that teaching to the test is not very effective. It's not going to help students develop a love of learning, and I think we'd both agree that's what's needed for students to succeed. But also, that's something that's been pushed out since No Child Left Behind. There shouldn't be an overemphasis on testing, but if we're going to be spending billions and billions of dollars every year in our education system, if parents are going to be trusting the public education system with their children, we want to make sure the kids are actually learning something.
Race to the top is No Child Left Behind on steroids. It's increasing teaching to the test. So, yes, absolutely.
I want to go to Bobby Jindal. I want you both to react. This is Bobby Jindal. I spoke with him a few months ago, and he brought up this Common Core controversy and his actions. Watch.
Part of the challenge is the federal government, the Obama administration, has got involved in pushing these standards, and the folks pushing it now, they try to tell you, well, we're not telling you, we're not dictating curriculum, we're just dictating the test. Well, here's the problem. And we, in Louisiana, we were on the path to put PARCC in our schools. All of a sudden, schools are being required to teach to the test, develop curriculum around the test, and before you know it, the test is driving not only your standards, it's also driving your curriculum and your textbook decisions. We don't need a one-size-fits-all approach.
Are the states being coerced to accept these standards via the government dollars? That is Jindal's contention.
Yes, absolutely. Look, the former general counsel and deputy general counsel of the U.S. Department of Education, in their white paper, Road to National Curriculum, found that the Race to the Top program, which pushed the Common Core into the states, violated 3 federal laws that tell the federal government you've got to keep the hands off of curriculum development. Moreover, that Race to the Top program exceeded the authorities in the Appropriations Clause. The Congress just told the U.S. Department of Education, you take this money to help states improve their standards. It didn't authorize them to go and push one set of standards onto the states.
Michael Brickman, how much flexibility do these states have?
Entire flexibility. You know, we're meant to believe that this is all of a sudden going to be a national mandate. We're just a few miles from Virginia. They didn't adopt the Common Core. There are states that have changed the Common Core. They've modified it, even dating back to 2010. If Louisiana wants to change the standards, they can do it. The problem is Governor Jindal's own education secretary didn't want to change them because they were an improvement over what they had before. The legislature didn't want to change them because they were an improvement over what they had before. And Governor Jindal himself, I really respect a lot of the things that he's done in school choice and other issues. But even in 2009, when the Race to the Top program came out, he said in his own press release that this was a voluntary program that he supported.
This is a quixotic view of what's happening. And it happened very, very quickly in Louisiana, and it's happening now across the whole country, is parents caught wind of the changes to the curriculum, and they became upset because they realized that they've lost just about all control over their children's education, and they are rising up like never before. It's probably one of the dominant, if not the dominant issues in domestic politics today.
Okay, but if this is a standard.
And within the church.
But it's a standard. It's not a curriculum. It's a standard. So the local school board still does have a good deal of authority, right?
Well, they have to have a, look, the state is adopting the standard, and the state is saying you have to take this,
you have to meet this test,
which aligned with the standards. So what's the school board going to do?
But how is that different than what Louisiana did before? The only
difference go and
is
they sign up, they buy the Common Core books.
Emmett, the only difference is the standards are better than they were before. That was the case before, where the states set standards. They weren't very good standards, and then the local school boards tried to meet these goals. How's that different?
This gets back to, ever since the federal government has been getting involved, education in America has been deteriorating. And
well, what's wrong with states voluntarily setting goals for what they want students to achieve?
If the federal government stayed out of it, we would have standards like in Massachusetts, and we would have states emulating what works. Like what worked in Massachusetts would be emulated across the country. And you'd have this competition among the states, a friendly competition. I'm going to learn from what you did.
So your concern is that you've got a government crammed down vis-a-vis
We've gone to a monopoly.
Education
We've
department.
gone to monopoly, and we know you don't get quality out of a monopoly.
Okay, before I let both of you go, there's been a lot of concern raised in the Catholic community, certainly among many of the dioceses, even those that have adopted Common Core and now are backing off. They feel this will impinge on religious liberty and their freedom to teach what they want to teach, particularly inculcating morals to the students. Each of your takes.
Yeah, informational texts, increased informational texts are a big problem for Catholic schools.
Because that's part of the test.
Yeah, and we're switching away from classic literature, and Catholic students were, at one time, before the Common Core, the Catholic curriculum was heavily based on classic literature. This is a big problem for the bishops, and they need to wake up and realize what's going on. The problem is they're just listening to their superintendents. Their superintendents were part of the process. They painted themselves into the corner by signing on to the Common Core before they realized what was going on.
I got to give Michael a shot here before we run out of time. Michael.
Well, look, I mean, we're, again, led to believe that this is this big, scary mandate, that it's a mandated national curriculum. It's not a mandate. It's not national.
Well, there are federal dollars attached.
Well,
but
states, and I do agree, if there's one thing we agree, the federal government never should have, the Obama administration never should have offered incentives for states. But you know what?
But that's what the NGA, the National Governors Association, asked the federal government to get involved. They asked the federal government to run this race to the top.
And we can agree that they never should have. But,
they own
but
the
that all is in the
they
past.
Own the Common Core.
That's all in the past.
It's in my children's school right now.
And I know you're getting upset about this, but look, this is something
getting upset,
that
and parents across America are getting upset about it.
If you look at the facts, this is very clear. This is something that states can change if they want. The Catholic schools can change if they want. I think it's about setting high goals, setting a high bar for kids that they can meet, improving choice, improving competition will improve our schools.
And I promise to have both of you back as we watch this play out, and we're going to resume this debate.
Sounds great.
Thank you both for being here. We will continue following Common Core as it wends its way through the school systems across America.